What if the most dangerous thing about traveling to the Middle Ages wasn't war, plague, or violence, but simply sitting down to eat? Modern imagination loves to romanticize the medieval world. In films and television, the Middle Ages glow beneath warm torchlight. Long wooden tables stretch across great halls. Roasted boar glistens beneath crackling skin. Fresh bread is piled high in baskets, steam rising as it is torn apart by laughing guests. Goblets overflow with dark wine and frothy ale. The scene feels rustic, communal, almost comforting a world where food seems simple, honest, and abundant. But this vision hides a far harsher truth. If a person from the 21st century were suddenly transported back to the year 1250, survival would not depend on avoiding knights, wars, or even the plague. The real danger would arrive much sooner at the dinner table, because the greatest threat would not be the sword. It would be your own stomach. The modern human body is the product of an invisible infrastructure: refrigeration, pasteurization, antibiotics, sanitation systems, and strict food safety standards that quietly protect every meal we eat. For generations, our immune systems have grown accustomed to this controlled environment. Remove those protections, and the familiar act of eating becomes something else entirely. In the medieval world, every meal carried uncertainty. Bread could hide fungal toxins capable of poisoning entire communities. Meat was often consumed at the edge of decay. Cooking vessels sometimes leached toxic metals into stews that simmered for hours over open fires. Even the water used to prepare food could carry invisible pathogens capable of overwhelming the body in a matter of days. What looked like nourishment could quickly become a biological gamble, and sometimes a slow and merciless poison. To understand how dangerous a medieval meal could truly be, we must begin with the single food that sustained most of Europe's population: bread. Bread in medieval Europe was never just another item on the table. It was the foundation of life itself. For millions of people across the continent, grain provided the majority of daily calories. In many regions, bread alone accounted for more than 2/3 of everything a person ate in a day. When harvests were good, communities survived another year. When harvests failed, hunger followed quickly behind. But even in years of abundance, the grain carried a hidden threat. Across the damp fields of northern and central Europe, a parasitic fungus frequently infected rye crops. The fungus replaced healthy grain kernels with long, dark growths that looked almost like twisted black thorns. Today, we know this organism as ergot. Modern agriculture has the tools to detect it. Grain is inspected, filtered, and tested in controlled facilities. Contaminated harvests are discarded long before they reach a bakery. In the medieval world, such protections did not exist. Farmers harvested their crops by hand. Grain was threshed, gathered, and milled together, often without the ability to separate the toxic growths from the healthy kernels. The dark fragments were ground directly into flour and baked into everyday bread. The toxins survived the oven. The illness that followed became infamous across Europe. People called it Street Anthony's fire. Those who suffered from it described a sensation of unbearable burning spreading through their hands and feet. Blood vessels tightened violently, cutting off circulation. Fingers darkened, toes blackened. Tissue slowly died, as if consumed by invisible flames. In its worst form, limbs could rot away and detach from the body. And the suffering did not stop there. Victims often experienced terrifying hallucinations, visions, voices, waves of delirium that swept through entire communities. In some historical accounts, villages appeared to descend collectively into madness after eating contaminated bread. For the people of the Middle Ages, this danger was tragic but familiar. Their bodies had lived with these risks for generations. But a modern human, suddenly placed in that world, would face something far more dangerous. A body with no tolerance at all. And ergot poisoned bread was only the first threat waiting on the medieval table. Even when bread escaped the danger of fungal toxins, another threat still lingered quietly in every loaf: Scarcity. Medieval Europe was not a world of overflowing granaries or reliable harvests. Agriculture depended entirely on weather, soil conditions, and fragile farming methods. A long rain, an early frost, or a swarm of pests could wipe out an entire season's grain. And when the harvest failed, hunger moved quickly through villages and towns. Grain became too precious to waste. In those desperate moments, people began stretching what little flour they had. Bakers, peasants, and even some households quietly mixed other materials into the dough to make the bread supply last longer. Historical records and archaeological findings suggest a surprising list of additions. Ground tree bark, crushed acorns, sawdust shaved from wood, powdered chalk, sometimes even clay or soil gathered from the earth itself. To modern ears, the idea sounds almost unthinkable. Yet for people facing starvation, these mixtures were often the difference between eating something or nothing at all. The medieval digestive system, hardened by years of harsh food and irregular nutrition, could sometimes tolerate these crude substitutes. But the modern human body would react very differently. Large quantities of indigestible material place enormous stress on the digestive tract. The intestines struggle to push the dense mixture forward. Sharp fragments of bark or grit can irritate the stomach lining. In severe cases, the massive material can become lodged inside the intestines. This condition, known today as intestinal blockage, causes swelling, intense pain, and eventually complete failure of the digestive system. In the modern world, surgeons can remove the obstruction and save the patient. In the year 1250, there were no operating rooms, no anesthesia, no antibiotics. An intestinal blockage was almost always a slow and painful death. And yet, strange as it sounds, even this adulterated bread might still have been the safer choice on a medieval table. Because once meat entered the picture, the risks became even greater. To a modern person, spoiled meat is easy to recognize. The smell turns sour and unmistakable. The texture becomes slimy. Instinct alone tells us not to eat it. But the medieval relationship with meat was far more complicated. In a world without refrigeration, time worked against every slaughtered animal. The moment a deer, pig, or cow was killed, the slow process of decay had already begun. Bacteria started breaking down the flesh within hours, especially in warm weather. Medieval cooks understood this reality, even if they did not yet understand the science behind it. To slow the inevitable, they relied on preservation methods that had been used for centuries. Meat was buried under heavy layers of salt. It was hung above smoky fires. It was dried in the open air. Sometimes it was fermented intentionally to extend its shelf life. These methods could slow spoilage, but they could not stop it completely. Among the aristocracy, a particular flavor even became fashionable. It was known as high game. Game animals such as deer, boar, or pheasant were often hung in cool chambers for several days before cooking. During this time, natural enzymes began breaking down muscle fibers, making the meat more tender. But something else was happening at the same time. Bacteria were multiplying. The strong, earthy flavor prized by nobles was often the earliest stage of decomposition. What diners described as richness was sometimes the first whisper of rot. Medieval cooks knew the smell could be overwhelming, so they turned to another luxury of the age: imported spices. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg traveled thousands of miles along medieval trade routes from Asia and the Middle East. These spices were incredibly expensive, sometimes worth their weight in silver. They flavored stews, sauces, and roasted meats. But they also served another purpose. They masked decay. A heavily spiced dish could hide the unpleasant aroma of meat that had already begun to spoil. To the senses of the diners, the meals still seemed rich and exotic. Yet spices could only deceive the nose. They could not stop the invisible world of bacteria already thriving in the meat. And some of those bacteria produce toxins far more dangerous than ordinary food poisoning, poisons capable of shutting down the human body itself. Among the most feared toxins in modern food safety is botulinum toxin, produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum. Scientists today recognize it as one of the most powerful biological poisons ever discovered. Even microscopic quantities can disrupt the nervous system with devastating speed. The bacterium itself is not rare. In fact, it exists naturally in soil and dust across much of the world. Under ordinary conditions, it remains harmless. But when the environment becomes low in oxygen inside sealed containers, improperly preserved meats, or dense food stored too long, it can begin producing its deadly toxin. Unfortunately, many medieval preservation methods created exactly these conditions. Smoking meat over slow fires, fermenting sausages in closed spaces, or storing thick stews in heavy pots for extended periods could unintentionally create the perfect environment for bacterial growth. Without thermometers, sanitation standards, or an understanding of microbes, cooks had little way to recognize when food had crossed the invisible line between preservation and danger. The result could be catastrophic. Botulism attacks the body's nervous system. At first, the symptoms appear subtle. Vision becomes blurred. The muscles of the face grow weak. Speech becomes difficult. Soon the paralysis spreads through the body, moving slowly downward. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles refuse to respond. The body remains conscious while control slips away. In the modern world, intensive medical care and antitoxins can sometimes save the patient. In the medieval world, such help did not exist. Once severe symptoms appeared, survival was unlikely. Yet even when the meat itself was safe, the danger did not end with the ingredients. Because another hidden risk waited quietly in every medieval kitchen. The vessels in which the food was cooked. Medieval kitchens revolved around a single imposing tool, the great iron or metal cauldron hanging above an open fire. These vessels simmered for hours, sometimes all day, slowly turning grains, vegetables, and meat into thick stews that could feed an entire household. But the very containers used to prepare these meals carried dangers of their own. Many cooking vessels were made from copper or metal alloys, such as pewter. At first glance, these materials seemed practical. They conducted heat well and were durable enough to survive years of constant use over flame. Yet both metals had hidden risks. Copper cookware, when exposed to acidic ingredients like vinegar, wine, or fermented sauces, could develop a greenish corrosion on its surface. This substance, known as verdigris, is a copper salt formed by chemical reactions between the metal and the food inside the pot. To the medieval eye, it might appear as nothing more than a harmless discoloration. In reality, it was toxic. When consumed repeatedly, verdigris could irritate the stomach, cause severe vomiting, and damage internal organs such as the liver. Over time, the poison accumulated quietly, with every meal cooked inside the same vessel. Pewter carried a different but equally dangerous problem. Unlike modern metal alloys, medieval pewter often contained significant amounts of lead. Lead made the material easier to mold, but it also slowly contaminated whatever food or drink came into contact with it. Lead poisoning rarely kills quickly. Instead, it creeps into the body over months and years. People exposed to it might suffer chronic exhaustion, persistent headaches, and anemia. As the toxin accumulated, it began attacking the nervous system and the kidneys, slowly weakening the body from within. In wealthy households, an even stranger practice made matters worse. If a barrel of wine tasted too sharp or acidic, some vintners sweetened it with lead acetate, historically known as sugar of lead. The chemical added a smooth sweetness that improved the flavor of the drink. But it also delivered a steady dose of heavy metal poison with every cup. Yet even these toxic kitchens were not the greatest threat waiting in the medieval world. Because the most dangerous substance of all was something people needed every single day: water. Rivers flowed through the center of daily life. They powered mills, supplied fish, and served as gathering places for entire communities. But those same rivers were used for everything else as well. Clothes were washed along their banks. Animal hides were soaked and treated in tanning pits using urine and harsh chemicals. Household waste was dumped directly into the current. And in crowded towns, rivers often functioned as open sewers, carrying human waste away from the streets. Yet despite all of this, the same water was frequently collected for drinking. Without filtration systems or an understanding of bacteria, medieval communities had little choice. The water looked clear enough, and for those born into the environment, it was simply part of daily life. But that water carried an invisible population of pathogens. Bacteria responsible for dysentery, typhoid fever, and cholera moved freely through these waterways. Parasites thrived in the contaminated flow. A single cup could contain thousands of microorganisms capable of attacking the human digestive system. For people raised in this world, exposure began early. Infants encountered these microbes almost from birth, and over time their immune systems developed partial resistance. A modern human, arriving with a carefully protected digestive system, would experience something very different. The first drink could trigger violent dysentery, bloody diarrhea, severe dehydration, fever, and a rapid loss of bodily fluids that could collapse the circulatory system in a matter of days. There was, however, a partial solution. Medieval people often drank small beer, a weak form of ale with very low alcohol content. The brewing process required boiling water, which killed many harmful organisms. In that sense, small beer could actually be safer than plain water, but it was not a perfect answer. Alcohol slowly dehydrates the body, especially when consumed throughout the day. In a society where food supplies were already limited and nutrition was often unbalanced, that dehydration added another layer of strain to the body. And as harsh as contaminated water could be, the medieval diet itself created its own hidden weaknesses. The modern diet is built on systems most people rarely notice. Global agriculture moves food across continents. Refrigerated transport preserves it for weeks. Supermarkets stock fresh fruits and vegetables in every season of the year. For the modern body, nutrients arrive with quiet reliability. The medieval world worked very differently. Food followed the rhythm of the seasons, and those seasons could be unforgiving. During the harvest months, villages gathered grain, vegetables, and fruit in large quantities. What could not be eaten immediately was dried, salted, smoked, or stored in cellars for the long winter ahead. But as winter stretched on, those stores slowly disappeared. By late winter, sometimes called the hungry months, many households were living on the last remnants of preserved food. Fresh vegetables were rare. Fruit had long since vanished from the table. The result was a gradual but dangerous decline in essential nutrients. One of the most common consequences was vitamin C deficiency, better known as scurvy. While many people associate scurvy with sailors crossing vast oceans, it also appeared frequently among inland populations during the coldest months of the year. The symptoms crept in slowly. Gums began to bleed while eating. Old wounds reopened as the body struggled to repair damaged tissue. Fatigue settled deep into the muscles. The immune system weakened, leaving the body vulnerable to infection. For peasants, the diet was limited but relatively simple. Among the nobility, however, a different dietary imbalance appeared. Wealth was displayed through food. Large quantities of roasted meat, rich sauces, sweet wines, and imported sugar were symbols of status and prestige. These foods contained high levels of purines, natural compounds that the body converts into uric acid. When uric acid accumulates in the bloodstream, it begins forming sharp crystals inside the joints. The disease that followed was gout, one of the most painful conditions known in medieval medicine. Aristocrats often suffered from swollen feet, inflamed knees, and joints so tender that even the weight of a blanket could feel unbearable. But even when food seemed plentiful and apparently safe to eat, another force shaped how meals were prepared. the medical beliefs of the medieval world. And those beliefs often made an already fragile diet even worse. Medieval medicine did not understand bacteria, vitamins, or nutrition in the way modern science does. Instead, health was explained through a framework that had guided physicians for centuries, the theory of the four humors. According to this belief, the human body was governed by four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness occurred when these humors fell out of balance. Restoring health meant restoring harmony between them. Food played a central role in this system. Every ingredient was thought to possess natural qualities, hot or cold, wet or dry. Meals were carefully prepared in ways that physicians believed would maintain the body's internal balance. Within this framework, raw fruits and vegetables were often viewed with suspicion. Many medical texts of the time warned that uncooked produce could cool the stomach and encourage harmful processes of decay inside the body. To avoid this imagined danger, food was frequently cooked far longer than necessary. Vegetables were boiled until soft and lifeless. Fruits were stewed into thick sauces. Even ingredients that might have offered vital nutrients were transformed through hours of heat over the fire. Unknown to medieval cooks, this process destroyed much of the vitamin content those foods contained. Ironically, the fear of raw produce was not entirely without reason. Fields were often fertilized with human waste, a common agricultural practice at the time. Vegetables grown in such soil could carry parasite eggs, roundworms, and other intestinal invaders waiting to enter the body. Cooking did reduce some of that risk, but the cost was a diet gradually stripped of nutritional strength. Over time, the consequences became visible. The immune system weakened. Minor infections became more dangerous. The body's ability to repair itself slowly declined. And yet, despite all these dangers, contaminated bread, spoiled meat, toxic cookware, polluted water, and fragile nutrition, the population of medieval Europe did not simply vanish. Life continued. Communities survived, which leads to a deeply unsettling question. If the medieval environment was so dangerous, why didn't everyone simply
For
die?
the medieval peasant, clean drinking water was a luxury. The rivers were often open sewers.
Medieval populations did not survive because their world was safe. They survived because their bodies adapted to it. From the very beginning of life, infants were surrounded by a dense, invisible ecosystem of microbes. They crawled on dirt floors, touched animals, and consumed food prepared without the sterile barriers modern societies depend on. Their immune systems did not grow in isolation. They developed in constant negotiation with bacteria, parasites, and environmental pathogens that modern sanitation has largely pushed out of everyday life. This exposure came with a brutal filter. Many children did not survive it. Disease, contaminated water, and spoiled food claimed countless lives before adulthood. But those who endured carried something more than luck. Their bodies learned to coexist with the microbial world around them. And those survivors passed their resilience forward. Over centuries, this slow biological conversation shaped entire populations. Communities became increasingly adapted to their local pathogens, their traditional diets, and the microbial landscape embedded in their soil, water, and food. What seems dangerous by modern standards was, for them, the environment their bodies had been trained to endure. A modern human suddenly entering that world would face a very different reality. Without immunity to the microbes circulating through medieval towns, without tolerance for bacteria thriving in poorly preserved food, without a digestive system conditioned by generations of exposure, survival would be deeply uncertain. The popular fantasy that a modern traveler could walk into the medieval world and thrive through superior knowledge often ignores a fundamental truth. Knowledge cannot replace biology. The first loaf of bread baked with contaminated grain, the first cup of untreated water, the first plate of meat handled without modern hygiene, any one of these could overwhelm a body shaped by modern sanitation. History, after all, is not written only in wars, castles, and royal courts. Sometimes it unfolds quietly at the dinner table. And in many moments of the past, the most dangerous enemy was not a sword or an army. It was the meal placed directly in front of you. If you enjoy exploring the darker realities hidden behind history's legends, consider joining us again here on Shadows of Valhalla. Because the past is not only made of heroes and battles, it is also made of the silent struggles ordinary people endured every day. And sometimes, the smallest details reveal the deepest truths.